They stepped over him in the hallway, cracked jokes behind his back, and never once said his name. Until the day he walked into the boardroom, owned the company, and fired every last one of them. Nobody ever looked twice at Howard Ellison. He was just there, mopping floors by the vending machines, wiping down the glass doors before sunrise, rolling his yellow cart past rows of cubicles, humming under his breath, while everyone else powered through emails, or clocked out without a word. At Morningside Tech in Mesa, Arizona, he was the janitor. No title, no recognition. No good morning, Mr. Ellison. Most didn't even know his last name. Some called him Howie. Others forgot he had a name at all. Hey, you missed a spot. One manager once joked, while spilling his coffee, intentionally, walking away laughing with two interns. Howard just looked at the stain, squatted down, and cleaned it like it didn't sting. But it did. For 20 years. Howard showed up at 9 p.m., left at 6 a.m. 6 nights a week. Same uniform, same quiet pace. He didn't eat in the break room. He didn't make friends. He didn't take days off. Even the building's badge scanner beeped. Like it was tired of seeing him. What they didn't see, what they never bothered to ask, was the mind behind the mop. How it had once been something else. Not a CEO, not a Harvard grad, but a sharp man. He built things with his hands. Took apart radios as a teenager, just to understand how they ticked. Life had knocked him down a few times. A bad investment. A family member who ran off with his savings. A son he hadn't seen in 14 years. But Howard didn't talk about that. He worked. He observed. And every night, he listened. The clink of glass in the executive lounge. The whispers behind closed doors. The careless comments from tired employees, who forgot someone was there. Someone paying attention. Man, if I owned this place, I'd gut the whole operations team. He once overheard. The irony wasn't lost on him. The floor of Morningside was cold. Not physically. They kept it at a cozy 72. But cold in the way that makes you feel invisible. The kind of cold that sets in when people walk past you. Like you're part of the furniture. Still, he showed up. He once found a pair of expensive cufflinks. Left in the restroom. Gold ones with the initials GB engraved. He placed them in a small bag. And left them at the receptionist's desk, without a note. That same day, a VP walked past him and said, "Man, you people never quit, huh?" You people. Howard didn't flinch. He didn't report it. He didn't even slow down. He just kept cleaning. Because while everyone else at Morningside saw a man pushing a mop, Howard saw something else. Numbers. Opportunity. Silence. And time had been working with him. Not against him. But there was one thing they hadn't figured out. And it would change everything. Howard knew better than to move fast. He'd learned that lesson the hard way in his late 30s. When a failed trucking business left him with nothing but debt and an old Ford pickup. Since then, patience had been his currency. So while he scrubbed coffee stains off conference room tables, he studied people. Not just how they treated him. That was obvious. But how they treated each other. Who deferred to whom? Who lied? Who was sloppy with emails? And careless with their passwords? Who stayed late? And who always found excuses to leave early? He wasn't being nosy. He was learning. There was a time years back when Howard used to speak more. Back when his wife was alive. And his teenage son still called him dad. With pride. But after his wife passed, and the relationship with his son dissolved, Howard stopped talking and started listening. And in the quiet, he began to notice everything. The company was profitable, but messy. Too many middle managers. Too much waste. No one seemed to notice the slow bleed. But Howard did. He'd walk by forgotten whiteboards, filled with strategy sessions and half-erased numbers. He'd pick up discarded printouts, with budget projections or internal memos. Every piece of paper. Every offhand conversation. It all told a story. And Howard remembered every bit of it. Sometimes during breaks, he'd sit in the janitor's closet and make notes in a small leather notebook. Not in full sentences. Just names, dates, percentages. Quiet math. It was around this time that the idea started forming. He didn't have a name for it yet. Didn't know how he'd pull it off. But he knew this. If he played it slow, kept his head down, and moved with intention. He could flip the whole script. One night, as he was cleaning the executive wing, he overheard a conversation between two board members. In town for a quarterly review. They were talking mergers, shares, buyouts. Their voices were low, but not low enough. They didn't expect the janitor to understand a word. But Howard understood everything. He went home that morning and sat in his kitchen, staring at the old newspaper rack next to the fridge. It was empty now. Nobody read papers anymore. But he remembered the feeling of flipping through. As a younger man, it had always made him feel small. Not anymore. The next week, he made a call to a man he hadn't spoken to in over 25 years. Clarence Boone, an old friend from Birmingham who now worked as a private financial consultant. Clarence owed him a favor. A big one. They met in a quiet diner off the highway in Tucson. Howard wore his uniform. Clarence wore a linen shirt and loafers. He looked at Howard with wide eyes. "Man, what are you doing in that outfit?" "Keeping my mouth shut," Howard said, "but I think I'm ready to make some moves." He laid out his plan piece by piece. Clarence was skeptical at first, but as the coffee cooled and Howard kept talking, his expression changed. "You want to buy into the company you clean?" "Not me," Howard said. "A name you'll help me create." They formed a small LLC with Clarence as the face. Howard funneled in savings, inheritance, even sold off his truck and a small patch of land he'd held on to for decades. Nothing flashy. Just enough to buy a small number of shares anonymously. No one at Morningside noticed. Why would they? It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet. And quiet things grow without warning. But that first buy-in wouldn't be the last. And one spilled bucket would push everything forward faster than Howard had planned. It happened during a late Tuesday shift in June. One of those nights when the desert air in Mesa doesn't cool even after sunset. Howard had just finished cleaning the third-floor bathrooms and was headed to the executive meeting space to take out the trash. He was careful as always, never left water on the tiles, never made noise. But that night, something slipped. His bucket caught on the corner of a door frame. The soapy water inside sloshed forward, splattering across the polished floor of conference room B, right in front of a group of mid-level managers reviewing slides for an upcoming investor pitch. There was silence. Then laughter. "Jesus, Howie," barked Gil Brandon, one of the louder VPs, "can you not ruin the floor for once? This is why you people stay where you are." Howard didn't look up. He just reached into his cart for paper towels. But Gil wasn't finished. "Get someone who knows what the hell they're doing," he added, waving to one of the interns like Howard wasn't even there. "I swear, this is why we outsource this crap." Howard wiped the floor slowly, without saying a word. He could feel eyes on him. Not one person offered to help. No one asked if he was okay. He left the room quietly. But that moment burned in his chest. Not because it was new, he'd been talked down to before. But because Gil had laughed like he was proud of it. Later that night in the janitor's closet, Howard took out his notebook. He wrote one word, Brandon. Then he turned the page and began to sketch out numbers. That was the moment things shifted. Howard's first set of shares had already been purchased under a shell corporation Clarence helped him set up, Granite Rise Partners. It sounded like a real firm. Clean. Neutral. It held just under 1% of Morningside's private equity. At that point, barely enough to be noticed. Barely enough to matter. But now it wasn't just an idea anymore. Now he had fire in his belly. Gil had accelerated something that was already in motion. Every paycheck after that went straight to the plan. Howard moved into a smaller apartment. Sold his late wife's wedding ring, something he'd kept in a drawer for years. He told himself she would have understood. That it wasn't about revenge. That it was about building something bigger than resentment. By the end of the year, Granite Rise held nearly 3% of the company. No one at Morningside paid attention. The company was expanding, growing fast. They'd opened a second office in Tempe, and the leadership was busy juggling investors and quarterly reports. They didn't ask about small equity shifts. Especially not from a quiet firm that never attended board meetings or filed complaints. But Howard watched it all. He listened to the same voices every night. Laughing in the break room. Whispering secrets in glass offices. And while they slept, he studied. Each December, Morningside's less active shareholders had the option to sell off shares back to the company or to private third-party buyers. Howard, through Granite Rise, quietly began acquiring small blocks of those shares, one here, one there. The process was slow. Painstaking. Some nights he'd come home and wonder if it was all just some ridiculous fantasy. But then he'd remember Gil's smirk. He'd remember the way employees dodged his cart like he was in their way. He'd remember how invisible he had become. Et comment puissante que cet invisibilite vraiment etate. Clarence called him once a month to check in. You really want to keep going? He'd ask. Howard always answered the same. Until I can sit in the front of the building without a mop in my hand. But Howard didn't know yet that the final piece of his plan would come from an unexpected insult. One that cut deeper than any before. It was a Friday night in early February when it happened. The office was emptier than usual. Most of the staff had left early for a company-sponsored retreat in Sedona. Only a few people remained in the building, finishing up reports and tying loose ends before the weekend. Howard was cleaning the break room when two junior marketing associates walked in mid-conversation, laughing louder than they probably realized. I mean, come on, have you seen the janitor's shoes? They look like he fished them out of a dumpster. Bet he doesn't even have a bank account, the other said, sipping from her LaCroix. He probably gets paid in quarters. They didn't see him standing behind the vending machine. They didn't care. Howard froze. Not because their words hurt in some new way, but because something inside him clicked. This wasn't just about building wealth anymore. Or making a point. It was about respect. About how easily people forgot that the ones they stepped over might one day stand taller than them. That night, after everyone left, Howard didn't clean. He sat on a crate in the supply closet and stared at the wall for nearly an hour. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Clarence. We're speeding things up, he said. I want to be in that boardroom by the end of next year. Clarence exhaled on the other end. You sure about that? I'm not waiting for people to change, Howard said. I'm going to change the room. The next 6 months were a blur. Howard used every trick in the book. He worked with Clarence to open 3 additional shell companies, all under different names. Each legally distinct. Each holding a growing number of Morningside shares. He stayed anonymous. Always. One of the firms, Tideswell Holdings. A few months later, the atmosphere at the company began to shift. You could feel it, not in loud announcements, but in the little things. People started holding the elevator for each other. Interns introduced themselves to the cleaning staff. Managers began eating lunch in shared spaces instead of hiding away in private offices. Howard spent the next year overseeing operations, not from a throne, but from a desk with a squeaky chair and a coffee maker that barely worked. He didn't care for titles or attention. What he cared about was giving people a voice. He raised wages for the janitorial staff, made sure contractors were included in conversations, and insisted on honest, face-to-face feedback between frontline workers and directors. He didn't throw a party. He didn't give a speech. He just kept showing up, walking the halls, asking questions, listening, the same way he always had. But by the second year, Howard started thinking about something else. What comes after the mission is complete. He'd never done this for recognition. He didn't build his quiet empire out of pride or to be called sir by the people who used to walk past him like he was part of the furniture. What he wanted was real change. And now that it had begun, he felt a different kind of tired. The kind that lives in your bones after carrying something for too long. So he began planning his exit. He met with Raul Navarro, the only board member who had responded with honesty when Howard asked why no one ever noticed. I want to hand this off, Howard told him. But not to another suit. To someone who listens. Raul nodded. Do you have someone in mind? Leah Armstrong, Howard said. She sees people. Always did. Leah had started as a junior accountant and quietly worked her way up, not with noise or ambition, but with kindness and awareness. She knew the names of every janitor. She asked questions. She noticed things. With the board's approval, Howard transferred his voting power and stepped away from the day-to-day. No ceremony. No farewell speech. He simply walked out of the building one last time in the same car he had parked there for 18 years. That night, he drove past the city limits, pulled over off Route 60, rolled down the window, and let the desert wind wash over him. He thought of his wife. His son. The thousands of quiet nights spent pushing that cart, dreaming of something better. He didn't feel anger anymore. Or pride. Just peace. In his back pocket was a folded note, the one he left in Leah's new desk drawer. It read, Power isn't about being seen. It's about seeing what others don't, and doing something about it. Back at Morningside, they kept a photo of him in the break room. Not a portrait. Just a candid shot of him mopping the lobby, headphones in, humming an old Motown tune. Next to the photo was a small plaque. No gold trim. No bold letters. Just 5 simple words. The man who paid attention. Howard never returned to the building. He spent his days volunteering at a community garden and tutoring kids in basic math at a public library in Tempe. No one there knew who he was. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Because the lesson he left behind wasn't about money, or revenge, or even justice. It was about humility. About the power of listening. About remembering that the person sweeping your floors today might one day own the building. So before you speak, look. Before you judge, pause. And before you ignore someone, ask yourself, what if they've been watching you all along?